The mysterious protector of the storm raged on, its winds howling through the dark, empty landscape. The human explorer, battered and bruised from the crash, staggered across the alien planet. His body ached, and his vision was blurry. He had no shelter, no way to escape the violent storm that was tearing the land apart. Each step he took felt like it might be his last. The sky above was thick with dark clouds, swirling violently. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the chaos that surrounded him. The air was cold and biting, the wind pushing him back as if nature itself was trying to keep him from moving forward. His energy was running low. He could feel his strength fading, and soon he would be unable to keep going. Just as he thought he could go no further, something strange happened. A shadow appeared in front of him, cutting through the storm like a knife. It moved with grace, as if the winds were not there. For a moment, the human thought he was imagining things, but the figure grew clearer. It was a woman, but not like any human woman he had ever seen. She was tall, with dark, glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the night. Her skin was a deep shade of red, and her hair was long and black, flowing like a shadow behind her. But what struck him the most were her wings, enormous, dark and leathery, stretching out like a pair of giant black sails. They shimmered in the dim light, as if they were alive, reacting to the storm. The human stumbled backward, his heart racing with fear. Was this a hallucination brought on by exhaustion? Or was it something real? His mind couldn't quite process what he was seeing. But the figure before him was undeniably real. The woman stepped closer, her movements swift and fluid, as if she were part of the night itself. Without a word, she extended one of her wings and wrapped it around the human, shielding him from the harsh winds. The warmth of her wing wrapped around him like a blanket, and for the first time since the storm began, the human felt a sense of safety. The cold that had gripped him for so long faded, and he could finally catch his breath. He looked up at the woman, trying to understand what was happening. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held a fierce intensity. There was something ancient and powerful in her gaze. The storm continued to rage around them, but within the protective barrier of her wings, there was a strange stillness. It was as if time itself had slowed down. The human could not speak. His throat was too dry, his body too weak. He tried to ask her who she was, but the words didn't come out. The woman did not speak either. She simply stood there, her wings wrapped around him, her presence more comforting than anything he had ever experienced before. It was as if she had been waiting for him, watching over him from the shadows. He tried to stand, to pull away, but the moment he moved, the wind picked up again, stronger than before. The woman's grip on him tightened, and she gently pulled him back into her embrace. It was clear that she would not let him go. She was not just protecting him from the storm, she was ensuring his survival. For the first time since the crash, the human felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The pain in his body seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet peace. He had no idea who this woman was or what she wanted, but one thing was clear: she was not a threat. She was something else, something beyond his understanding. As the storm continued to rage outside, the human allowed himself to rest in the shelter of her wings. He closed his eyes, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Was this an alien, a creature from another world? Or was she something else entirely, something that defied all explanation? The woman stood still, unwavering in the face of the storm. Her wings wrapped tightly around the human, blocking out the world around them. She did not move, did not speak, yet, in the silence between them, The human felt an unspoken bond, forming an understanding that, for whatever reason, they were meant to cross paths in this moment of crisis. The storm howled louder, but the woman remained calm. Her presence, though mysterious and powerful, brought a sense of protection that the human could not explain. He had no idea what was happening, or how he had come to be here, but in this strange moment of peace amidst the chaos, he realized that he had survived only because of her. With his body finally able to rest and his mind at ease, the human drifted into a strange, uneasy sleep, sheltered by the alien vampire woman's wings. As he slept, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something far greater than he could comprehend. The storm had passed, but the mystery of who this woman was and why she had saved him still lingered. In his mind, and as the night stretched on, the woman stood by, watching over him with a quiet, knowing gaze. What she was waiting for, only she knew. But for now, she had fulfilled her role. She had protected him from the storm. The mysterious protector of the storm had finally subsided, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The winds had calmed, but the air was thick with tension. The human awoke, disoriented at first, as the strange warmth that had cocooned him faded. He opened his eyes and found himself still wrapped in the alien woman's wings. Her massive wings were stretched wide, but they were no longer shielding him from the storm. Instead, they stood tall like an impenetrable wall, encircling him in a quiet, unnatural calm. For a moment, he couldn't move, paralyzed by confusion. Where was the storm? Was it truly over? He glanced around, his heart racing again, only to find the landscape eerily still. The alien planet, once turbulent and chaotic, now seemed lifeless. The land was dark and barren, with strange rock formations jutting from the ground like twisted sculptures. Slowly, he sat up, rubbing his eyes to clear the fog of exhaustion. The air was still, almost suffocatingly so. The woman stood tall before him, her wings folded around her like a dark cloak, casting shadows on the ground beneath. The human could only stare at her, his mind still trying to comprehend the reality of what was happening. The woman did not move or speak, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light, followed his every movement. He had no idea who she was or why she had saved him, but there was something about her force, a power that seemed to command respect. The human opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The emotions flooding through him, fear, confusion, gratitude, were too overwhelming. Was he even safe with her, or had she rescued him for some darker reason? He had no answers, only more questions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, the woman spoke. Her voice was deep and resonant, unlike any language the human had ever heard, yet somehow it was familiar. It was as if the sound of her voice reached into his very soul, bypassing the barriers of speech and comprehension. "You are safe now," she said, her words clear, though her tone was cold and distant. The human blinked in surprise. The language was not one he recognized, yet somehow the words seemed to make sense to him. He could understand her, despite the foreign sound of it. He found himself looking into her glowing eyes, feeling drawn to them. "Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. He had to know. He needed answers. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze softened slightly, though her expression remained stern. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her attention to the horizon, where the dark storm clouds had finally begun to dissipate. Her wings rustled gently as she moved, and the human couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at her power. "I am of the Nyx, she said slowly, as if weighing her words. A protector of the lost. Her voice held an air of finality, but the human couldn't quite understand what she meant by that. The Nix, who were they? He thought of asking more, but the words felt heavy in his chest. It was clear she didn't want to reveal too much. What do you want from me? He pressed. Why am I here? The woman's gaze shifted back to him, her eyes glowing with an intensity that almost burned. There was something deep within her, a power that seemed ancient and raw, something that made the human feel small in comparison. You are not the first, she murmured. Others have come, but none have survived. She paused, her voice softening. You are different. The human's confusion grew, his heart pounding. What did she mean by that? Others had come. Had there been more people stranded on this alien world? He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, but no answers followed. The silence stretched on, and the human began to feel the weight of the world around him. He had been stranded on an unknown planet, alone and injured. Now he was in the presence of an alien being whose power seemed endless. Yet she remained distant, a mystery he couldn't solve. Why are you helping me? He asked again, desperation creeping into his voice. The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. I do not help for free. The storm you survived was no accident. It was a test. You passed. A test. The human was stunned. He had no idea what she was talking about. He had merely fought to stay alive, to survive the crash. What test could she be referring to? I did not ask for your help, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I am not part of whatever game this is. The woman's eyes narrowed, her wings rustling once more. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something dark, yet strangely gentle. Then why do you fight to survive? She asked, her voice calm, yet filled with an underlying strength. You fight not for your life, but for something greater. You are a part of this world now, and you will face challenges that none before you. Her face, the human's mind reeled. None before him had survived. Was she implying that others had been lost here, stranded just like him, but had failed? And what did she mean by a part of this world? Before he could speak again, the woman turned away, her wings lifting slightly, as if she was ready to move. On, come, she said. There is more you must understand. Follow me. The human had no choice but to obey. As confused and frightened as he was, there was no other option. He followed her, his eyes fixed on the dark figure ahead of him, the mystery deepening with each step. The unseen path the woman moved swiftly through the barren landscape, her wings folding in and out as though they had a life of their own. The human followed, his mind racing with questions he couldn't voice. The world around them was silent. The storm now nothing more than a distant memory, but the weight of the woman's words clung to him like the thick air. Others had come before him. None had survived. What did that mean for him? He struggled to keep up, his body still weak from the crash, but something about the woman's presence kept him moving. There was a strange pull to her, a force he couldn't explain. She had saved him. But why? What was her true purpose? As they walked, the landscape seemed to change. The ground beneath their feet grew rougher, and the sky above shifted from the soft, muted colors of dusk to the deep reds and purples of night. The alien planets, moons rose, casting a pale light on the world below. The air was cool, and the human could feel the faintest tremor of energy in the atmosphere, like the planet itself was alive. Watching them, they reached a large, jagged rock formation that loomed ahead of them, its spires stretching high into the sky. It seemed out of place in the otherwise desolate environment. The woman stopped in front of the formation, her eyes scanning the area before turning to the human. "Here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is where your journey begins." The human stood still, looking up at the towering rocks. They seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't understand. The woman's words echoed in his mind. This was where it began. But what exactly was beginning? Is this the place where the others failed? He asked, his voice uncertain. What happened to them? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward one of the large stone pillars, her wings folding neatly behind her. The human hesitated, then followed. As he stepped closer, he noticed that the rocks were covered in strange markings, symbols carved deep into the stone. The woman reached out and touched one of the symbols. As her fingers made contact, the rocks seemed to shimmer, and the air around them crackled with energy. The human stepped back, startled by the sudden surge of power. "These symbols," the woman said, her tone softer now, "are the key to understanding your role here. They represent trials, challenges that have been set before you. Many have come before you, human, but none have passed the trials." The human stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. Trials? What kind of trials? And why was he being chosen to face them? "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why was I chosen?" The woman turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Because you have a purpose. You are not like the others. You have something they did not. You survived the storm, and that is only the beginning." He couldn't make sense of it. He was just an explorer, stranded on an alien world, with no idea how to survive. And yet, here he was, standing before a powerful alien being, about to face trials that none before him had survived. "What do I have that they didn't?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of doubt and curiosity. "You have will," she said simply. "You have the strength to fight, even when all hope seems lost. That is why you were chosen." She paused, then turned back to the glowing symbol on the rock. As she touched it once more, a low rumble echoed through the ground. The human felt it beneath his feet, and a sense of foreboding filled the air. The stone pillars began to shift, slowly opening to reveal a hidden path beneath them. The woman stepped forward, motioning for him to follow. "Come," she said, her tone more urgent now. "The path is ready for you. The trials await." The human hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He had no choice but to follow. There was no turning back now. This was his only chance to survive, to understand why he had been brought here. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, following the woman into the darkness beneath the rock formation. The path was narrow, the walls lined with strange symbols, and glowing markings that seemed to shift as they walked past them. The air grew colder, and the human could feel the energy in the air growing stronger, more intense, as they walked deeper into the labyrinth. The woman's wings brushed against the walls, their soft rustling the only sound that echoed in the silence. The human couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. What kind of trials awaited him? And would he be able to survive them? He had no answers, but one thing was clear: he wasn't alone. The woman was with him, guiding him, protecting him. She was a mystery, an enigma he couldn't understand. But there was something else about her, something that made him trust her, despite the questions swirling in his mind. Finally, they reached the end of the path, and the human found himself standing in front of a massive door made of a material he had never seen before. It was smooth and black, with intricate designs carved into its surface. The door seemed to hum with power, and the human could feel the weight of it, as if it were alive. The woman stopped in front of the door, turning to face him. "Beyond this door," she said, her voice steady, "lies the first trial. Prepare yourself. It will test your will, your strength, and your resolve." The human's heart raced. He had no idea what lay beyond that door, but one thing was certain. He had no choice but to face it. His survival, his future, depended on it. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The first trial of the massive door before them loomed like an insurmountable obstacle. The human stood in front of it, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman had not spoken since they had reached the door, but her presence was all-encompassing, her wings folding neatly behind her as she watched him intently. The air around the door crackled with energy, and the human could feel it in his bones. This was no ordinary door. It was a barrier between him and something unknown, something that would test him in ways he couldn't even imagine. The woman stepped aside, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "The first trial awaits," she said, her voice calm, almost as if she had seen countless others stand where he stood now. "You must decide whether you are ready to face it." The human took a deep breath. He had no choice. He had been brought here for a reason, and though he didn't understand it, he knew he had to press forward. His survival depended on it. He reached out toward the door, his hand trembling slightly. But as soon as his fingers brushed against its surface, it responded. The door vibrated, and the intricate designs began to glow, shifting and moving like living things. It seemed to pulse with power, as if it were alive, breathing. Without warning, the door opened, the heavy stones sliding away to reveal a dark chamber beyond. The human stepped forward, his breath shallow, and entered the room. The woman remained standing outside, her eyes fixed on him. "You are not alone in this trial," she said softly. "You will face yourself." As he entered the chamber, the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening sound, leaving him in complete darkness for a moment. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. Suddenly, the room lit up, revealing a vast, empty space. The walls were made of smooth stone, their surface reflecting the faint light that came from the center of the room. At the far end, a large, glowing crystal stood in the middle of a pedestal. It pulsed with light, sending ripples of energy across the room. The human took a cautious step forward, his eyes locked on the crystal. It was beautiful, hypnotic even, but something about it felt wrong. It beckoned him, calling to him in a way that he couldn't explain. As he walked toward it, a voice suddenly echoed around the room, deep and powerful, as if it were coming from the very walls themselves. "Do you seek to understand your true self?" The voice boomed, reverberating through his mind. "The path to survival lies in accepting who you are." The human froze, his heart skipping a beat. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, but there was no one else in the room with him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What is this trial?" The crystal in front of him pulsed brightly, its light intensifying as the voice responded. "This is your trial. You must confront the part of yourself that you fear the most. Only then will you be able to move forward." The human's chest tightened. He didn't understand. Confront the part of himself he feared the most. How could he do that? He wasn't sure what that even meant. The ground beneath him rumbled, and suddenly the space around him began to change. The walls of the chamber melted away, and he found himself standing in the middle of a vast forest, surrounded by thick trees. It was dark, the shadows cast by the towering trees almost suffocating. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind, and then he saw it. A shadow moved in the distance, dark and ominous. The human's heart began to race. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The shadow came closer, and as it drew near, the figure became clearer. It was him, or rather, it looked like him. A darker version of himself, with eyes that glowed like burning coals, his face twisted into a cruel, mocking grin. The figure was dressed in tattered clothing, his body hunched, exuding an aura of malice. The human stepped back, his breath coming in quick gasps. "What is this?" he whispered to himself. "Is this me?" The figure spoke, its voice cold and cruel. "You are weak. You will never survive. You do not belong here. You cannot face what's coming." The words cut deep. The human tried to speak, but no sound came out. Fear gripped him, tightening round his chest. His darker self stepped closer, its mocking grin widening. "You think you can survive this trial?" The figure hissed. "You're nothing more than a fool. You will fail like all the others." The human's mind spun. Was this his fear? Was this what he had to face? The self-doubt that had plagued him throughout his life, the belief that he wasn't strong enough, that he was always destined to fail. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not like you." The figure laughed, a hollow, echoing sound. "You think you can defeat me. You think you can overcome your fear." The darkness around the figure grew, swallowing the forest, and it towered over the human dot. The human's legs felt like lead, but something inside him, something deep within, began to stir. He had come so far. He had survived so much. He couldn't let this fear take him now. Not when he had the chance to prove himself. He had a purpose. He wasn't weak. He was stronger than this. "I am not you," the human said, his voice growing stronger. "I will face what comes. I will survive." With those words, the dark figure paused, its grin faltering for a brief moment. The human took a step forward, his body trembling but determined. The shadow shuddered, then dissipated into the air, leaving the human standing alone in the forest. The chamber around him began to shift again, returning to the dark stone walls. The glowing crystal in the center of the room dimmed, its light fading as the trial came to an end. The voice that had echoed through the chamber spoke once more. "Well done," it said, the words heavy with meaning. "You have faced your fear. The first trial is complete, but the journey ahead will be even harder." The human took a deep breath, his body still shaking. He had faced his fear and won, but what came next? What other trials awaited him on this strange alien world? As he turned to leave the chamber, the woman was waiting for him, her wings folding neatly behind her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of approval. "You have passed the first trial," she said, her voice calm but filled with an unspoken depth. "But this is just the beginning. The path ahead will test you, in ways you cannot yet understand." The human nodded, his heart still racing. He had made it this far, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The second trial, the air in the chamber was still and heavy as the human stepped away from the now dimmed crystal. His heart was still racing from the intense trial he had just faced, and the memory of the shadowy figure, his darker self, lingered. In his mind, Despite the victory, doubts crept into his thoughts. Would he be able to survive what was to come? Or had this first trial merely been a warm-up for something far more dangerous? The woman stood silently by the entrance of the chamber, watching him with her glowing eyes. She had not spoken since he passed the first trial, and the silence between them was deafening. The human could feel her gaze, though, an intense weight on him, as though she was waiting for him to take the next step. "You are ready," she finally said, her voice deep but measured. "The next trial will not be like the first. It will test you in ways you cannot prepare for." The human swallowed, trying to calm his nerves. He had already faced his inner fears, but something told him that this next trial would push him far beyond what he had just experienced. He nodded, gathering his strength. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice steady, though the uncertainty still lingered. The woman stepped aside and gestured for him to follow. "This way," she said simply, leading him through the dark, winding corridors of the stone structure. As they walked, the temperature in the air seemed to drop, and the faint echoes of their footsteps were the only sounds in the deep silence. They reached another large door, similar to the first one, though this one was made of a dark, shiny material that seemed almost liquid in its smoothness. The human's eyes narrowed, and his instincts told him that something was different about this door. The very air around it seemed charged, as though the door itself was waiting for him to approach. Without hesitation, the woman moved to the side, giving him space to stand in front of it. "The second trial awaits," she said, her tone serious. The human stepped forward and reached out to touch the door. It hummed under his fingers, and with a low sound, it slid open, revealing a vast, empty space beyond. The light inside was dim, with shadows that stretched long across the floor. He couldn't see what lay inside, but he felt a sense of dread creep over him. Inside, the room was large, and at its center stood another pedestal, much like the first trial. But this time, there was no crystal. Instead, there was a swirling vortex of light, twisting and shifting in the center of the room. The human stared at it, the brightness pulling him in like a magnet. His heart raced, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman's voice echoed through the room, calm but heavy, with meaning. "This is the second trial, the trial of choice. You must decide who you are and what you stand for." The human stepped into the room, his eyes locked on the swirling vortex. It seemed alive, alive with possibilities and dangers. 100 different futures flashed before him in the bright, shimmering light, some filled with success, others with failure, and a few with darkness beyond imagination. As he moved closer, he felt the familiar weight of uncertainty fill his chest. He had already faced his fear, but this was something else. This trial didn't feel like a battle of strength or will. It felt like a test of the soul. What would he choose? What would he become? Suddenly, a voice echoed from the vortex, but this time it wasn't the woman's voice. It was his own. "Choose wisely," the voice said, his own voice echoing through the chamber. "The path you choose here will determine everything." The human felt a chill run through him. Was this part of the trial, or was this something deeper, something more personal? He looked back at the woman, but she stood motionless, her eyes fixed on him, offering no guidance, no answers. The voice in the vortex spoke again. "Do you embrace the power that is offered to you, or do you turn away from it? Will you take control of your fate, or will you let it control you?" The human hesitated. Power, fate, control. His mind swirled with conflicting thoughts. He had always believed that destiny was something that could be shaped, that no matter the odds, he could overcome anything. But this felt different. The power being offered wasn't just physical strength, was something much deeper. It was a power to shape the world, to control it. Was that something he was ready for? The voice in the vortex continued, urging him to make a decision, to embrace what lay ahead. You cannot stay in the middle forever. Make your choice. The human closed his eyes for a moment, trying to block out the swirling vortex before him. What did he truly want? What kind of person would he become by choosing the power that was being offered to him? He had seen what could happen when power was misused, the darkness, the destruction. But could he control it? Could he use it for good? He didn't know, but he had to make a decision. He couldn't stand here forever, lost in indecision. With a deep breath, the human stepped forward, toward the swirling light. He reached out his hand, ready to embrace whatever came next. As his fingers brushed against the edge of the vortex, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with a force unlike anything he had ever felt. But then, just as quickly, the energy faded, leaving him standing in the same spot, confused and disoriented. The light around him dimmed, and the vortex slowly closed, leaving him in darkness once again. The trial was over, but the choices he had made, whether they were the right ones, were still unknown. The woman moved toward him, her expression unreadable. You have made your choice, she said. The path ahead will now be shaped by it. The human nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in his mind. He wasn't sure if he had chosen the right path, but he knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. The journey was far from over, and what lay ahead was beyond his understanding. Come, the woman said, gesturing for him to follow. There is more to be done. The next trial will test you even further. The human followed her, his mind heavy with the weight of the choice he had just made. He had no idea what awaited him next, but he knew one thing: he was no longer the same person who had arrived on this alien world. Whatever happened, he was committed to this path, for better or worse. The trial of the mind, the air was thick with anticipation as the human followed the woman through the dark passageways once again. The path ahead felt more uncertain than ever. The previous trials had pushed him to confront his own fears and make difficult decisions, but something about what lay ahead felt more ominous. His mind buzzed with the weight of the choice he had just made, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the power he had embraced might come with consequences. The woman's presence was unwavering, her wings tucked neatly behind her as she led him through the winding corridors. Her silence spoke volumes, but the human could not help but feel as though she was watching him, waiting for something. Was she truly guiding him, or was she testing him further? Finally, they arrived at another door, this one different from the others. It was not made of stone or crystal, but of something more organic, as if it had grown from the very walls around them. The surface was smooth and pulsated with a soft, almost imperceptible light, as though it were alive. The woman stopped in front of the door, her gaze turning to the human. This is the third trial. It is not one of physical strength or power. It is the trial of the mind. The human felt a chill run through him. The trial of the mind. What could that possibly entail? You must face your deepest thoughts, your inner conflicts, and your unresolved past. The woman continued, her voice steady but carrying a weight of finality. Only by confronting these can you truly move forward. The human swallowed hard, his mind racing. The past. What part of his past was he meant to confront? Was it the memories of his family, the guilt of his mission, the fear of failure. He had so many unresolved questions within himself, so many things he had never fully dealt with. The thought of facing them head-on made his stomach tighten. With a slow, deliberate motion, the woman reached out and touched the pulsating door. It opened with a soft hiss, revealing a dark, mist-filled room beyond. The human took a step forward, hesitant, but driven by something deeper within him. He had come this far. He had to face whatever was inside. As he entered the room, the mist swirled around his feet, rising and falling like a living entity. The temperature dropped, and the shadows grew darker, more oppressive. For a moment, he couldn't see anything at all. But then, slowly, figures began to emerge from the mist. At first, they were faint outlines, but soon they became clear people, faces, and voices from his past. His mother's face appeared, soft and kind, her eyes filled with warmth. He could hear her voice calling his name, as she had so many times. When he was a child. "Come back to me," she whispered. "You don't have to do this alone. Come home." The human felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her again, to feel the warmth of her embrace. But something held him back. The mist thickened, and he stepped back, shaking his head. "No," he whispered to himself. "I can't go back. Not now." But then, another figure emerged from the mist. It was his father, standing tall and stern, his eyes full of disapproval. The human's chest tightened. He had never felt like he lived up to his father's expectations, always falling short in his eyes. "You are weak," his father's voice boomed. "You can't handle this. You will fail, just like you always do." The human recoiled, the weight of those words hitting him harder than he expected. His father's voice was like a knife in his heart. Had he always been afraid of failing? Was that what had driven him all these years? The fear of disappointing everyone, especially his father. The figures continued to emerge, each one representing a different part of his past, his childhood dreams, his lost friendships, the broken relationships. Every regret, every painful memory surfaced in the mist, swirling around him, pulling him in different directions. He tried to move forward, but the voices grew louder, the faces more intense. His doubts and fears were no longer whispers. They were shouting at him, tearing at his soul. "You're not strong enough," they all seemed to say. "You're not worthy of this power." The human clenched his fists, his heart racing. This was his trial. This was the moment when he had to face all the parts of himself that he had buried: the fear of failure, the guilt, the shame. He had always run from these things, hiding from them in the hope that they would go away. But they hadn't, and now they were here, staring him in the face. "You have to face them," the woman's voice echoed from the darkness. "Only by confronting your past can you move forward." The human closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The fear was overwhelming, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep running from his past. He had to accept it, learn from it, and move beyond it. With a trembling hand, he reached out into the mist, pushing past the figures that had once seemed so real, so painful. One by one, they faded into the shadows, their voices growing softer, until there was only silence. The room grew quiet, and the mist cleared. The human stood alone, the weight of the past still heavy on his heart, but no longer suffocating him. He had faced it. He had confronted his fears, his regrets, and his doubts. And in that moment, he felt a strange sense of peace. The woman stepped forward, her expression unchanged, but her eyes softer, almost approving. "You have passed the trial of the mind," she said, her voice calm but filled with a hidden strength. "Now you are free to move forward." The human nodded slowly, feeling lighter than he had in years. The trial had been more than just facing his fears. It had been about accepting himself, flaws and all. He wasn't perfect, but he didn't need to be. He had survived. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged stronger. But even as he felt the sense of relief wash over him, he knew that the trials were far from over. The journey ahead was still long, and the challenges would only grow more difficult. But for the first time, he was ready. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "What's next?" The woman's wings shifted behind her, and she turned to lead him out of the room. "The next trial will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. But remember, you are not alone. You never were." With those words, she turned, and the human followed, knowing that whatever lay ahead, he was prepared. He had faced his mind. Now, it was time to face the world. The final trial, the journey through the alien world, had brought the human face to face with his fears, his past, and the power that lay hidden within him. Each trial had pushed him further, forcing him to confront things he had never wanted to face. But the woman had guided him every step of the way, her presence unwavering, her wings a constant source of both protection and mystery. Now, after the trial of the mind, the human stood at the entrance to the final trial. The weight of what he had already endured pressed down on him. He had survived the storm, faced his deepest fears, and confronted his past. But there was one trial left, one final test that would determine if he was truly ready for what lay ahead. The air was thick with anticipation as the human followed the woman through the winding corridors. This place, this alien world, felt different now. It no longer felt like a strange, hostile environment. It felt like a place of learning, of transformation. And the woman, though still an enigma, felt like an unmovable force guiding him toward something greater. At the end of the long passageway, they came to a vast open chamber. The walls were lined with glowing symbols, pulsing with an energy the human could feel deep in his bones. The chamber itself seemed to hum with power, the air vibrating with an intensity that made his skin tingle. "This is the final trial," the woman said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Here you will face your destiny." The human stepped forward, his heart pounding. Destiny. It was a word he had never fully understood until now. He had always been focused on survival, on making it through each day. But now, something was different. He could feel it in his bones. This was the moment that would define everything. The center of the chamber was dominated by a massive crystal, its surface smooth and clear, almost translucent. It stood on a pedestal, glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. The crystal was alive, its energy radiating outward, filling the room with an undeniable force. The woman stepped aside, her wings folding behind. "Touch the crystal," she instructed. "It will show you what you are meant to become." The human hesitated for a moment, the weight of her words settling over him. What would the crystal reveal? Would it show him the man he was meant to be? Or would it expose something even darker, something he wasn't prepared to face? With a deep breath, he stepped forward and reached out toward the crystal. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling his mind with images, memories, and sensations. It was overwhelming, too much for him to process all at once. He saw flashes of his past, his childhood, his training, his journey through the stars. He saw the people he had lost, the ones he had tried so desperately to save. He saw moments of triumph and failure, of courage and fear. But then the images shifted, and he saw something new. A future, his future. He saw himself standing on a battlefield, his hands gripping the hilt of a weapon, his face hardened by years of conflict. He saw a world torn apart by war, its people struggling to survive. And in the midst of it all, he saw himself strong, resolute, but alone. The vision shifted again, this time showing a different future. He saw himself standing with the alien vampire woman, her wings spread wide as they fought together against a common enemy. This time, the human was not alone. He was part of something larger, a force for change, for protection, for peace. The visions flashed faster now, and the human struggled to keep up, his mind overwhelmed by the possibilities. He saw the crystal shattering, the power within it unleashing destruction, and then he saw himself stepping forward, choosing a different path, a path of healing, of unity, of hope. The images stopped as abruptly as they had started, and the human staggered back, gasping for air. The chamber around him was silent once more, the crystal now dim and lifeless. "You have seen what you could become," the woman's voice echoed through the room. "Now you must choose." The human's chest rose and fell with each labored breath. The choice, he had seen the future laid out before him, each path leading to something different. But the decision wasn't just about what he wanted. It was about what he was willing to fight for. What kind of man did he want to become? He thought of the visions he had seen, the battlefield, the broken world, the hope that had flickered even in the darkest moments. He thought of the woman beside him, her wings a symbol of strength, of protection, of something greater than himself. She had led him this far, but now the choice was his. "What do you choose?" The woman asked again, her voice soft but firm. The human closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had already faced so much, but this final decision would shape everything. That came next. He could choose the path of power, the one where he stood alone, fighting to survive. Or he could choose a path of unity, where he fought not for himself, but for something greater, something that would change the future, not just for him, but for everyone. "I choose hope," the human said, his voice steady. "I choose to fight for a future where we don't have to fight at all." The woman nodded, her eyes glowing softly with approval. "Then you have passed the final trial." The crystal before them began to glow once more, its light pulsing with the force of the decision the human had made. The power that had once seemed so overwhelming now felt like a guiding force, a beacon of light in the darkness. "You have completed the trials," the woman said, stepping closer. "You are ready." The human stood tall, his heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. The journey had been long, and the trials had tested him in ways he never thought possible. But now, standing at the end of it all, he knew that he had made the right choice. The trials had shaped him, but it was his own heart that had led him. Here, the woman extended her wings, and the human stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. They had faced the darkness together. Now it was time to bring the light.